Today we begin a journey through the book of Ruth. This series is called The Road to Redemption. And the first part is this: 2 ways to respond to suffering. Because Ruth 1 is not just a story about a widow, a daughter-in-law, and a journey back to Bethlehem. It is a story about suffering. It is a story about loss. It is a story about how pain can either close the heart or reveal the beauty of covenant love. And from the beginning, the text forces us to ask a serious question. What happens inside you when suffering comes? Does suffering make you bitter? Does it make you isolate yourself? Does it make you see God wrongly? Or does suffering become the place where your faith, your love, and your loyalty become visible? Before we enter Ruth 1, we need to understand the world in which this story takes place. The book of Ruth begins like this. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. That sentence matters. Ruth does not begin in a spiritually healthy moment in Israel. It begins in the day of the judges. And the book of Judges ends with one of the darkest conclusions in the Old Testament. It says, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes." That is the world of Ruth. A world without spiritual order, a world where people followed their own desires, a world where covenant faithfulness had collapsed, a world where everyone did what seemed right to them. And then Ruth 1 tells us there was a famine in the land. This is not just a random economic crisis. In Deuteronomy 28, God had warned Israel that a famine would come as a sign of covenant discipline when the people refused to listen to him. So the famine is not normal. The famine is a sign that something is wrong between Israel and God. And here's the irony. The famine begins in Bethlehem, or it happens in Bethlehem, which means the house of bread. So there's no bread in the house of bread. That is the irony of disobedience. The place that should have been full of blessings is empty. The place where they should have fed others is now starving. This is what happens when people live far from God. They may still have the name, they may still have the history, they may still have the land, but the blessing is gone. To understand Naomi's tragedy, we also need to understand the family structure of that time. Ancient Israelite society was shaped by 3 realities. First, it was patriarchal. This means authority belonged to the oldest living man in the household. The patriarch was the center of the home. He carried the authority. He carried the responsibility. He carried the protection of the family. Secondly, it was patrilineal. That means inheritance and family identity passed through the male line. The 2 primary resources were land and children. Children carry the family name into the future. This is why 2 laws mattered deeply in Israel. The first was the law of the land in Leviticus 25:13 through 28. The land was not supposed to disappear permanently from the family line. The second was the law of levirate, marriage, in Deuteronomy 25:5 through 10. If a man died without children, a close relative could raise up offspring in his name so that his line would not vanish. Third, it was patrilocal. That means the family unit and living space were built around the oldest male. Families lived together. They worked the land together. They shared the produce of the land together. So in that world, a woman's societal safety was normally connected to the father, husband, sons, land, and household. Now keep that in mind as you look at Naomi, because Naomi loses it all. Ruth 1 introduces us to a family: Elimelech, Naomi, their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. They leave Bethlehem because of the famine, and they go to Moab. Elimelech's name means, "My God is king." That is a powerful name. But his decision raises a question. If his God is king, why does he leave the land of covenant discipline and go to Moab? Moab may offer temporary material relief, but spiritually, Moab is dangerous. Moab was not only a historic enemy of Israel, Moab was also a land of idolatry. So this family escapes a material crisis, but walks into a spiritual crisis. They leave the land where God is disciplining his people, and they go to a land where other gods are worshipped. Then the tragedy deepens. Elimelech dies. We are not told how, we are not told why, but his death changes everything. Naomi loses her husband. In that culture, protection normally came through the father, the sons, the husbands. Now Naomi depends on her sons. But then her sons marry Moabite women. One marries Orpah, the other marries Ruth. And after about 10 years, both sons die. Now Naomi's condition could hardly be worse. She had no husband, she had no sons, she had no land in Moab. She has no security, she has no income, she is a foreigner in a foreign land. She has no legal strength. She cannot simply return to her father's home. She is older. She seems unable to rebuild her life by normal social means. She is left with 2 daughters-in-law. That is all. A biblical commentator described Naomi's condition as follows: she is a stranger in a strange land, a victim of life and death. That is Naomi. Her world has collapsed. She did not live through the war in Ukraine. She did not experience an earthquake in Turkey and in Syria as the one that happened, but she was living through a real war of survival. A powerful earthquake had destroyed her entire world, and she now stands in a ruin of her life. When Naomi hears that the Lord has visited his people and given them food, she decides to return to Bethlehem. But she tells Orpah and Ruth to go back. She says, in essence, go back to your mother's houses. That phrase matters. Normally, we might expect your father's houses, but your mother's houses may suggest a place where they would be prepared for a new marriage. Naomi is saying, go home, start again, build a new family, find protection, find the future. I cannot give you that. I cannot give you husbands. I cannot give you sons. I cannot give you security. I cannot give you a future. If you stay with me, Naomi says, you will live on the margins. You will be vulnerable. You will become dependent on mercy and others. Naomi sees herself as empty. And because she sees herself as empty, she believes she has nothing to offer. Orpah turns back. And we should not treat Orpah as if she is some monster. She does what Naomi tells her to do. She returns home. But Ruth does something completely unexpectedly. Ruth clings to Naomi. She refuses to leave. She does not choose safety. She does not sacrifice relationship for protection. She does not abandon loyalty in order to secure a future. She binds herself to Naomi with the words that still shake us today. Listen first to Naomi's words. Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb who could become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband tonight, and bear sons? Would you wait until they were grown? No, my daughters, it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake, because the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Naomi is suffering deeply. We should not minimize her pain. She lost her husband, her sons, her stability. She lost her future. But the text also shows us how she interprets that suffering. She says, the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Later, she says as well, the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. And again, the Lord has brought me back empty. And once more, the Lord has testified against me. Naomi's problem is not that she is grieving. Grief is not sin. Lament is not unbelief. The problem is that her pain begins to shape her view of God. She sees only a God who is against her. She sees only punishment. She sees only loss. She sees only emptiness. And when her view of God becomes distorted, her identity also becomes distorted. She says, don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara. Naomi means pleasant. Mara means bitter. She no longer sees herself as pleasant. She sees herself as bitter. She sees herself as a victim of divine action, and the tendency of her suffering is isolation. When her view of God becomes wrong, Naomi cannot see the opportunities around her. She can only see the losses. She cannot see that Ruth is standing right beside her. She cannot see that through Ruth, God has already begun the road to redemption. Now listen to Ruth. Ruth says, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do to me, and more also, if anything but death separates me from you. This is one of the most beautiful statements of loyalty in Scripture. Ruth also suffered. Ruth also became a widow. Ruth also lost her security. Ruth also faced an uncertain future, but her response is different. Naomi becomes bitter. Ruth becomes devoted. Naomi looks inward. Ruth looks toward the other. Naomi says, I am empty. Ruth says, I will stay with you. Naomi sees only the hand of God against her. Ruth sees the God of Naomi as more desirable than the gods of Moab. This is stunning. Ruth is not choosing the easier path. She leaves her people. She leaves her land. She leaves her gods. She leaves her possible future. She joins herself to an old widow who has no visible security. Why? Because Ruth sees something in Naomi's God that is worth more than the security of Moab. With Naomi and Naomi's God, Ruth does not know if she will have a future. But that unknown future with the Lord is better than a future offered by her old world. This is conversion language. Ruth is not merely moving geographically. She is receiving a whole new identity. Like Abraham, she leaves her people and her land. She enters a new people, and she enters a new covenant world, and she says, your people shall be my people. Now look at that contrast. Naomi's suffering turns her inward. Ruth's suffering moves her outward. Naomi wants isolation. Ruth chooses attachment. Naomi sees only what she has lost. Ruth sees the person she can love. Naomi says, God has emptied me. Ruth says, I will not leave you. Both women are widows. Both women are vulnerable. Both women have lost the security of tomorrow. But when Ruth had the opportunity to choose safety, protection, and a new family, she chose sacrificial love. That is the difference. In a world where everyone did what was right in their own eyes, Ruth does what is right in the eyes of covenantal love. In a global world of conquest, self-interest, and survival, Ruth is self-giving. In a world of me, Ruth lives in us. This matters for us because suffering always reveals something. Suffering reveals what we believe about God. Suffering reveals what we believe about ourselves. Suffering reveals how we treat others when we are afraid, when we have lost. Someone once said, when something dark happens to you, you must be careful that something dark does not begin in you. Richard Rohr said, in essence, if we do not transmit our pain, if we do not transform our pain, we will transmit it. That is what happens with Naomi. Her pain is real, but her pain begins to interpret God for her. Her pain begins to rename her. Her pain begins to isolate her. But with Ruth, things are different. Ruth's pain becomes the stage where covenantal love appears. The key phrase is this: Ruth clung to her. Now that word is important. It is the same word that is used in the book of Genesis when a man leaves his wife and mother and clings to his wife. They become one flesh. It is a word of deep attachment, a word of covenantal joy, a word of covenantal loyalty, of love, a word of committed love. And behind Ruth's action stands one of the richest words in the New Testament: Hesed. Hesed means covenant love, loyal love, steadfast love. From this Hebrew word comes love that sacrifices, love that does not abandon, love that does not turn away when things become hard, love that binds itself to the good of one another. This word describes the love between people in covenant. It also describes the love of God for his people. Ruth becomes a living picture of Hesed. Naomi says, I am empty. But she is not empty. Ruth is standing right beside her. Naomi says, God is against me. But God is already working for her through Ruth. Naomi says, call me bitter. But God is already preparing redemption. Naomi just doesn't see it yet. This is how God often works. He begins redemption before we are able to even recognize it. He places grace beside us while we are still calling ourselves empty. He sends covenant love to us while we still think we are abandoned. Let me summarize Naomi's condition. When Naomi had a wrong view of God, she could no longer see opportunities. She could see only losses. She thought God was punishing her. She thought she was returning home empty. But she could not see that Ruth was standing beside her. And through Ruth, God would begin her redemption. When Naomi had a wrong view of God, her identity changed. She moved from Naomi, pleasant, to Mara, bitter. When Naomi had a wrong view of God, her pain turned her into a self-focused victim instead of a servant who could still see others. This is not written so we can judge Naomi harshly. It is written so we can recognize ourselves. Because suffering can do the same thing to us. Pain can rename us. Pain can isolate us. Pain can make us blind to grace. Pain can make us say, God is against me, while God is already placing roots beside us. Observations about Ruth. Now look at Ruth. With a right view of God, Ruth sees opportunity, not only loss. She leaves her old secure world and begins a new life and a new identity in a new land. She becomes joined to God and to the people of God. In a world of me, Ruth chooses us. Her character is revealed through the risks that come with loyalty. Ruth knows that beside Naomi, she had no guaranteed future, but her love keeps her loyal. Love keeps her near. Love keeps her faithful until death and even beyond death. When Ruth says, where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried, she is not using sentimental language. In that culture, she is saying, I will take responsibility for you until the end. I will care for your burial. I will be buried where you are buried. My loyalty to you goes beyond the grave. That is extraordinary love. That is hesed. So what do we learn from Ruth 1? We learn when you go through suffering, make sure you have a right understanding of God. Prepare yourself. Because if your view of God becomes distorted, your suffering will begin to shape your identity. You may start calling yourself by your pain. You may start seeing yourself only through your losses. You may start believing that God is only against you. But the story of Ruth teaches us this. God may already be working redemption beside you, even when you cannot see it. Now, secondly, when you go through suffering, that suffering becomes an opportunity to reveal your true character. It becomes the place where your devotion to God and His people become evident. The Word of God is not a world of me. It is a world of us. Ruth shows us that love does not abandon when life becomes hard. Love does not run when there is no visible benefit. Love does not calculate only personal safety. Love clings. Love sacrifices. Love remains. Thirdly, God initiates redemption for both kinds of people. For believers like Naomi that may have strayed, and for believing outsiders like Ruth. Naomi still belongs to Israel, but she struggles to believe rightly. Ruth comes from Moab, but she clings to the God of Israel. And God begins the road to redemption for both. That is grace. That is the beauty of this story. And this road will not end with Naomi. It will not end with Ruth. It will move toward Boaz. It will move toward David. And ultimately, it will move towards Christ. Because in Christ, we see the greater Redeemer, the one who entered our suffering, the one who did not abandon us, the one who clung to His people with covenant love, the one who loved us not only until death, but through death, that we may live. So when suffering comes, do not let pain rename you. Do not let bitterness isolate you. Look again at the God of covenant love and ask Him to make you the kind of person who does not only live for me, but for us. Because redemption often begins in the place where love refuses to leave.